Changing Ways, a podcast for the minds, for the thoughts, for the hearts, for the people. This episode is intended to be a bridge between the previous episodes that we spent time discussing what it means to be human and connected that to the realization of the fact that we are created beings and giving due right to our creator and the acknowledgement of our creator. And this episode, it stands to highlight the specific qualities and characteristics that must be in place in order for a thing to reach the level or to hold the status of true divinity, dictating that that object should be worshipped. So hopefully this will be another source of enlightenment and a bridge for that which, God willing, will follow. Welcome to another episode of Changing Ways. In this episode, we'll discuss the absolutes of divinity. The absolutes of divinity, meaning those things that fundamentally must be in place in order for an individual to logically consider worshiping and considering that that worship is being directed to the correct object, the correct God, or in simpler terms, those absolutes of divinity that dictate if what any one of us is worshiping can actually be considered true and deserving of worship. And so we have a list of 7 things to cover in this discussion. 1, the first absolute is perfection. And that is the perfection that negates all flaws in every aspect. And then every other absolute, it follows in accordance to this absolute perfection. Absolute perfection. And so the second absolute is power and authority. Absolute power along with absolute authority. And by power, we mean the ability. By authority, we mean the status to manage and govern and command and prohibit and reward and punish without any retribution, without any accountability. But furthermore, then we go to the third absolute, which is connected to the perfection of that authority. And that is the absolute perfection as it relates to knowledge and wisdom. The absolute perfection as it relates to knowledge and wisdom. And so there is nothing that is hidden or can be hidden or unknown. And there is no action, no command, no prohibition that can be out of place. And the fourth absolute is that that entity has to be free of all needs, because this is the stark contrast between the God and the worshiper. In that if the God is in need, then why is the worshiper worshiping that God? That God has needs on any level, in any way, at any time, in any place. Then that fundamentally opposes absolute power and absolute authority. And so, if there's any need, then that negates on so many levels the perfection that must be absolute. And anyone who worships anything that has needs that it itself cannot meet, so it has needs for things outside of itself, other than itself, then that thing fundamentally should never be considered God or a God or deserving of worship. And the fifth absolute is that with all of the perfection, there can't be any true comparison. What do we mean by true comparison? I mean, people may put forth their ideas and their thoughts as it relates to God and as it relates to religion and as it relates to what is worshiped and what people worship and what people have worshiped over the course of human history. But where God is true, where that God is real and possesses all of the absolutes of divinity, then fundamentally there can't be anything that is able to be compared to that divine being. And how many people worship things that, when we look at the absolutes, it becomes clear that they are not divine and they do not have a role or the characteristics and the qualities that put them in a position, in a status to share in any way in worship, or that in any way or in no way should worship be directed to them. And so worship is always dependent upon absolute perfection, absolute perfection in every aspect. And that includes being free from partners and equals and rivals. And our reality as human beings is that we were one nation, فاختلفوا, as is mentioned in the Quran, that the human being was one nation and then they differed. And those differences that overtook the human being, that distracted and disrupted and divided so that we are no longer one nation, that is a nation as it relates to beliefs, having the same belief, identifying the same God, in the context of perfection in the absolutes of divinity. And the sixth absolute is that there is permanence. The absolute of divinity in connection to permanence without any change or any end. So if that which the people worship, it changes, or it can be changed, or it was non-existent and then it became existent, or it comes in and out of existence, or it enters and exits in any way as relates to thoughts and as relates to what the people proclaim regarding it. All of that is indicative of falsehood as it relates to what the people are considering to be God. Because the absolutes of divinity, they dictate that there is no change. Because fundamentally, if perfection is absolute, if perfection is absolute, then any change would mean, one, that the object was deficient and it had to be improved. It had to become better. Two, that the object was unable to maintain its perfection. And so it needed to be renewed or repaired and things of that nature. So ultimately, if the people consider that they are religious, that they are worshiping, that they have found God in all of these experiences that people have, then we simply say evaluate the absolutes of divinity. And in that evaluation, whatever you find yourself to be acknowledging to be God, and you find yourself worshiping, then that entity cannot combine the qualities of absolute divinity. Or we say, if that which you worship cannot combine or does not combine the qualities of absolute divinity, then it is impossible to be a God deserving of worship. So we simply say, what do you worship? And what is worship? And what have you really invested of thought in evaluating the perfection, that absolute perfection, and these points of absolute divinity? So we encourage everyone to go into themselves and to consider what you worship. Does it have a perfection that is flawless and it negates the possibility of any flaw? Does it have absolute power, absolute authority? Does it have absolute knowledge? absolute wisdom? Is it absolutely free of all needs? Does it absolutely have nothing that can be compared to it? Is it absolutely permanent in its existence without any change, nor subjected to any termination or any conclusion of its existence? And again, that seventh absolute of divinity is that whatever is worshiped and it does not combine the qualities of absolute divinity, then it is impossible to be a God deserving of worship. So it's upon the people, if they really want change, they really want to be the best and most humane human being, they have to modify their thoughts, their beliefs, their understanding to be in harmony and to embrace these absolute realities about God that must be, because if they do not exist, then a person is worshiping something that's flawed, something that's incapable, something that's not real, something that's not true. And we know and we've learned in the Quran that God has said, ذلك بأن الله هو الحق وأن ما يدعون من دونه هو الباطل, which means that is because Allah, He is the truth, and whatever they call upon besides Him, then that is falsehood. So we ask that you think about this, and until next time we meet, God willing, I hope that you have good thoughts, and I hope that you act intelligently, and I hope that you desire for yourselves the best things so as to change despite situations and circumstances, to change as is necessary despite customs and cultures. Be free, be willing to break free and understand the absolutes of divinity. Thank you for listening, and God willing, we'll meet again to further the discussion on changing ways. You are invited to send your thoughts and your comments to our email address at QUE.changingways@gmail.com. QUE.changingways@gmail.com. Be a part of the process. Give your thoughts, your comments, and we'll build together. God willing. Changing Ways, a podcast for the minds, for the thoughts, for the hearts, for the people.